Edward Butch O'Hare is flying his F-4F-3 Grumman Wildcat plane on the mission to intercept Japanese planes on their way to his aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington. The carrier's position has been discovered, and O'Hare is racing against the clock to save it. The first wave of Japanese planes have been stopped by anti-aircraft fire and Wildcat fighters, but the second wave is about to arrive, and the situation is dire. Butch and his wingman, Marion Duff Dofilo, are the only American planes in position to take on the Japanese planes, but Dofilo's guns have jammed. With 3 minutes left before the Japanese reach the USS Lexington, this brave pilot with an incredible background story makes the decision to engage the enemy alone. Butch's father was Edward Joseph E.J. O'Hare, also known as Easy Eddie. The family lived in St. Louis. They were of humble beginnings and lived in the apartment above Soulard grocery store, which belonged to E.J.'s father-in-law. He taught his son how to shoot, and Edward became quite the marksman. E.J. bought the rights to the mechanical rabbit, an asset which was used in dog races to replace a real rabbit and give the dogs a motivation to run. E.J. promoted the invention all over the Midwest. When he came to Chicago, one man in particular became very interested in the rabbit as a business proposal. That man was none other than Al Capone. This was the Prohibition era, and Chicago was run by gangsters, and Capone was one of the most notorious of them all. Capone took a liking to E.J., and they developed several businesses together. E.J. took a deal with the devil and became Capone's personal lawyer. E.J. became known as Easy Eddie and got Capone out of a lot of difficult legal situations. Eddie provided everything for his children. Nothing was beyond his reach now he was working for the mob, but he was worried that he was setting a bad example for his son. So he sent Butch to the Western Military Academy in Illinois, from where he graduated in 1932, and proceeded on to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. E.J. was fascinated with flying, and he inspired Butch to become an aviator. As time went by, E.J. became disillusioned with his life working for the mob. What would become of the name O'Hare? Would it be tainted and overshadowed by the nickname Easy Eddie? What kind of man was he inspiring his son to become? The final straw was Valentine's Day of 1929, when Capone's thugs brutally took out several rival gang members. Although it was unproven, everyone knew that Capone was guilty. E.J. realized that he was possibly the only one who could stop Capone. Wrestling with his conscience, he decided to testify against his boss, knowing that this action would come at great cost. But he felt he had to do the right thing and set an example for his son to be a better man than he was. With agent Frank Wilson and his group of untouchables, and the records that Edward provided, Al Capone was on track to be convicted of a crime of tax evasion. And much to his surprise, Al Capone was found guilty. The film The Untouchables was loosely based on these events. The character of E.J. was called Walter Payne. Eddie had done the right thing and had finally given an example of bravery and morality to his son. Happy in that knowledge, he expected some form of retribution from Capone's gang and was prepared to take the consequences. In 1939, while driving home in his car, the mob finally caught up with Easy Eddie, and he paid the ultimate price for his actions against Capone. At that same time, Butch O'Hare was flying in what was described as brilliant azure, with little clouds. He landed at sunset and was told of his father's death. He took emergency leave to attend E.J.'s funeral, and then immediately went back into service. In 1941, Butch married Rita Worcester just 6 weeks after meeting her. Initially, he was stationed on the USS Saratoga, but after the events of Pearl Harbor, he was transferred to the USS Lexington. After the Japanese attacked Rabaul, Vice Admiral Wilson Brown gave the order to cross the South Pacific and take the attack to the enemy. Shortly after setting sail, they got the message from a US submarine that they had been discovered by a Japanese snooper, and the enemy planes were on their way to sink the Lexington. The Japanese were flying Mitsubishi Hamaki, or cigar bombers. These were twin-engine land-based bombers that had excellent performance due to the aircraft's lightness. The flip side was that they offered almost no protection for the crew. The Americans nicknamed them Betty bombers. They attacked in 2 waves of 9 and 8 planes. The first wave was taken out by fire from the carrier. Butch and his wingman, Marion Duff Dofilo, launched from the carrier just as the second wave approached. It became clear that only the 2 of them were in a position to stop the attack. No other plane was close enough. They fired test rounds and came to the dreadful realization that Duff's machine guns were jammed. That left Butch on his own as the only fighter who could stop the Japanese from destroying the USS Lexington. He had enough ammunition for just 34 seconds of fire. Butch didn't hesitate and started the defense of his ship. The Bettys were flying in V formation, very close to each other. They outnumbered Butch by 8-1. Butch started the attack, and 2 Japanese planes were immediately incapacitated. Butch knew what he was doing. He was an exceptional marksman and carefully conserved his ammunition. 2 planes were down, but there were 6 more to go. The USS Carrier was still in danger. Alone in the sky and facing insurmountable odds, Butch showed true grit and turned his plane once more to face the 6 enemy planes. His strategy was to go for accurate shots to the engines and fuel tanks. He took aim and pressed fire. The 3rd plane was damaged, and then the 4th plane was shot down. In the 6th Betty was Lieutenant Commander Takuzo Ito. He came close to bombing the carrier, but Butch was relentless. He concentrated all his fire on Ito's Betty. The explosion was so powerful that Ito's engine nacelle burst out of the plane and it fell into the water. But the fight wasn't over. The 1st plane, although heavily damaged by Butch, managed to regain power and caught up with him. Butch started shooting, but ran out of ammunition. Frustrated, he pulled away, hoping that the anti-aircraft guns would shoot the 4 remaining bombers. The remaining Bettys dropped their ordnance. With the Japanese airmen rattled by Butch's defense, every single one missed their target, and their bombs fell harmlessly into the ocean. Just 2 of the Bettys escaped, 3 were shot down, and the other 2 were lost. With his home carrier saved, Butch returned to the Lexington shortly after 5:45 p.m. For his actions on that day, President Roosevelt promoted Butch to lieutenant commander and awarded him the Medal of Honor. His wife Rita hung the medal around his neck. The news of O'Hare's heroic action had far-reaching effects. Up to that point, much of the news from the front was not good. The country needed a hero, and Butch's actions became national news. He set an example and an inspiration to all the US forces. In 1943, on a mission to intercept 20 enemy planes, Butch never returned. If the name O'Hare sounds familiar, in 1949, Orchard Depot Airport in Chicago was renamed the O'Hare International Airport in his honor. It is now the 2nd largest airport in the US. A replica of the plane he flew is still on display in Terminal 2. The name O'Hare is forever linked with heroism.